In the land of our ancestors, it is said that the sky has a memory. It remembers the scent of the first yams, the sound of the first drum, and the taste of the first tears of joy. But it also remembers when it is forgotten. And in the year of the sky without tears, the kingdom of Ifeoma learned that a forgotten sky is a vengeful one. The sun had become a merciless, white eye in a bleached sky. The great River Ifi, once the lifeblood of the kingdom, had shriveled into a cracked, dusty scar on the face of the earth. And in the heart of the kingdom lived Ease, the last of the Rainmakers. He was an old man, his skin as dark and wrinkled as a dried mango seed, and his eyes held the weary gray of a rainless cloud. He was the last man alive who knew the sky's secret language, the ancient rhythm of the rain dance. But his gift was a heavy burden in a world that was beginning to value the merchant's coin more than the shaman's wisdom. For you see, the drought that plagued the land was not the only one. There was another, more dangerous drought in the hearts of the people, a drought of faith. The once lush kingdom of Ifeoma was dying a slow, thirsty death. The vibrant green of the farmlands had faded to a brittle, exhausted brown. The harmattan season, which usually came and went, had overstayed its welcome like a malevolent guest, its dusty breath choking the very spirit of the land. The Oba's council meetings were no longer about festivals and prosperity, but about survival. At the center of these tense gatherings were two men, representing two different ages. One was Ease, the Rainmaker, a living relic of a time when the world was governed by spirits and tradition. The other was Jide, the young, charismatic leader of the Merchants' Council. Jide was a man of the New World. He spoke not of spirits, but of irrigation canals, not of rituals, but of trade routes to the coast for grain. He saw the drought not as a spiritual punishment, but as a practical problem to be solved with logic and human ingenuity. We waste our time with this nostalgia, Jide would argue, his voice ringing with the confidence of youth and commerce. While we wait for this old man to dance, our children grow thin. We must dig, we must build, we must trade. The sky has abandoned us, so we must rely on our own two hands. His words found fertile ground in the desperate hearts of the younger generation. In his small, quiet hut at the edge of the village, Ease felt the people's doubt like a physical weight. With him lived his granddaughter, Zala. She was a fiery, bright-eyed girl, the only one to whom he had passed the ancient knowledge. She was a vessel of his legacy, and her heart burned with anger at the disrespect shown to her grandfather. "They do not see, grandfather," she would say, her voice tight with frustration. "They see a frail old man. They do not see the storms you hold within you." Ease would simply look out at the pale, unforgiving sky. "A rainmaker's power does not come from his own strengths, my child. It comes from the belief of his people. When their faith runs dry, so too does my connection to the sky." The breaking point came on the day the Oba's eldest wife collapsed from heat and thirst in the palace courtyard. A wave of fear, more potent than any before, washed over the kingdom. The elders, their faces etched with worry, demanded that the Oba command Ease to perform the rain dance. Jide and his followers openly scoffed. The Oba, a wise man caught between the fading past and the uncertain future, summoned both Ease and Jide to his throne room. The air was thick with the scent of dry clay and desperation. "Ease," the Oba began, his voice weary. "My elders demand the old ways. They say you must dance and bring back the rain that has forsaken us." He then turned his gaze to Drought. "And Drought here says we must invest our last resources into digging a great canal to a neighboring river, a project that may take months. If it succeeds at all." The Oba stood, his royal robes seeming to hang heavy on his frame. "I will honor tradition one last time. Ease, you will have your chance. But if you fail, if the sky remains silent after your ritual, then we will put our face and our future in the hands of men like Drought. The age of Rainmakers will be over." The ultimatum hung in the air, heavy and final. This was not just a request to bring rain. It was a trial for the soul of their people. That evening, Zala looked at her grandfather, her eyes wide with fear. "The rain dance? Grandfather, you have not performed it in 20 years. Your body." Ise shook his head slowly. "The simple rain dance is for a simple drought, my child. For a sky without tears, for a drought born of disrespect. A greater ritual is needed." He rose and walked to an old, carved chest in the corner of his hut. He opened it, and a scent of old earth and dry herbs filled the air. "This is not a task that can be completed in our village square," he said, his voice taking on a new strength. "The sky has forgotten the sound of our feet. We must journey to the 3 sacred places and gather the echoes of water. Only then can we remind the sky of its duty." He explained the quest. First, they must travel east to the great salt water, to the place where the ancestors first emerged. There, they had to gather the salt tears of the first mother, a ritual that could only be performed when the tide was at its lowest under a full moon. Second, they had to journey north to the highest peak of the Sleeping Mountain, a place so high that the clouds themselves rested on its summit. There, they had to find the stone heart of the mountain, a rock that perpetually wept, even in the driest heat. And third, they had to find the hidden cave of the first river, a subterranean spring deep within the earth. There, they had to capture the whisper of the first river, the very first sound that water ever made in the world. Zala listened, her fear being replaced by a sense of awe and profound purpose. This was a true magic, the deep lore that had been forgotten. "We will do it," she said, her voice steady. Their journey began the next morning. They carried little, only a sacred clay pot for each echo, some dried meat, and a deep resolve. The kingdom of Ifeoma was even larger and more damaged than Zala had realized. They walked for days through villages where the people's eyes were as empty as the wells. They saw farms that had been reclaimed by the red dust, and the bones of cattle bleaching under the relentless sun. In these villages, the name of the Rainmaker was a curse, a symbol of a failed past. Finally, after a week of travel, they smelled it on the wind. Salt. The air grew thick and heavy, and the dusty red earth gave way to sand. They had reached the coast. The great salt water, the ocean, was a magnificent and terrifying sight. It was not the calm, blue water of stories, but a churning, gray expanse that crashed against the shore with an angry roar. They found the sacred cove, a place marked by 3 towering stones that looked like ancient, praying figures. Ise consulted the moon. "We must wait 2 nights," he declared. "The tide will be at its lowest then. But the ocean is angry. Its spirit is troubled by the thirst of the land." For 2 days, they prepared. Ise taught Zala the ancient chants, the songs meant to soothe the spirit of the water. On the second night, a full, white moon hung in the sky, its light painting a silver path across the churning waves. As the tide receded, it revealed a dark, glistening rock that was normally deep underwater. "That is the eye of the first mother," Eve whispered. "The salt tears will form on its surface. We must be quick." As they made their way across the wet sand, a great wind rose from the sea. It was not the gentle whisper of the village, but a howling gale that tore at their clothes and threw salty spray into their faces. The ocean roared, its waves crashing closer and closer, as if trying to reclaim the sacred rock before they could reach it. "The ocean tests us," Eve shouted over the wind. "Do not show fear. Sing the chant." Zala, her heart pounding, closed her eyes and began to sing. Her voice, at first trembling, grew stronger, weaving into her grandfather's deep chant. They reached the rock. On its surface, tiny, glistening crystals of salt were forming, like frozen tears. With great care, using a special wooden spoon, Eve began to scrape the salt crystals into the first clay pot. A massive wave, larger than all the others, rose from the sea, a towering wall of dark water and foam. It was about to crash down upon them. Zala faltered, her song catching in her throat. "Sing, child," Eve commanded, his eyes never leaving his task. "Your face is our only shield." Zala took a deep breath, looked at the terrifying wave, and sang louder than she ever had in her life. Her voice soared over the roar of the wind and water, a single, pure note of unwavering belief. At the last possible second, just as the wave was about to break, it seemed to hesitate. It crashed down with a deafening roar, but its force was spent just feet from the rock, drenching them in cold spray but leaving them unharmed. Eve scraped the last of the salt into the pot and sealed it. They had the first echo. Exhausted, soaked, but triumphant, they made their way back to the safety of the high dunes. Zala looked back at the angry sea, then at the sealed pot in her grandfather's hands. She felt the salt on her lips and tasted not just the ocean, but the flavor of true, hard-won magic. They rested for a day before turning north. Zala looked towards the horizon, where the faint, jagged silhouette of the sleeping mountain broke the skyline. The coast had tested their courage. The mountain, she knew, would test their spirit. The first part of their great task was done, but the journey to truly heal the world had only just begun. The journey from the coast to the foothills of the sleeping mountain was a journey through a silent, grieving land. The harmattan winds, which should have long since departed, still haunted the plains, carrying not the scent of life, but the fine, red dust of decay. But within Zala, a new strength had taken root. The trial at the sea had washed away her girlish frustrations, replacing them with the quiet, profound resolve of a woman who had looked into the eye of a storm and had not flinched. She walked beside her grandfather not as a student, but as a partner. Eve, too, seemed to have drawn strength from the salt and the sea. A spark had returned to his weary eyes. He taught Zala as they walked, not just the chants and the rituals, but the deeper magic of the world. He showed her how to read the stories in the cracked earth, how to listen to the thirsty whispers of the baobab trees, and how to feel the deep, slow heartbeat of the land itself. "A rainmaker does not command the sky, Zala," he explained, his voice gentle. "She listens to the earth's plea and lends her voice to its prayer. We are not masters, we are messengers." As they began their ascent into the foothills, the landscape began to change. The air grew thinner, cooler. Great, ancient stones dotted the landscape, their surfaces covered in moss that was somehow, miraculously, still green. It was as if they were entering a different world, a world that the drought had not yet fully conquered. But the world they had left behind did not forget them. One evening, as they made camp in a high, windy pass, a runner from Ifeoma found them, his body weary from the long journey. He brought news from the Oba. The people grow restless. Great ease, the messenger panted, accepting the water Zala offered him. Jide the merchant has convinced the council. He has begun digging his great canal. He has taken all the able-bodied men and they are trying to divert the river from the neighboring kingdom of humans. Ease closed his eyes, a deep sadness on his face. He is a fool. The people of humans will see it as an act of war, and the river spirit, disrespected and angered, will give them nothing but mud and misery. The messenger nodded grimly. The Oba fears the same. He begs you to hurry. Jide's actions are making the earth itself angry. The drought deepens with every shovelful of dirt they dig. The news settled heavily in Zala's heart. It felt like a race between the ancient, patient magic of her grandfather and the arrogant, impatient ambition of Jide. We must move faster, she said to Ease once the messenger was resting. Ease placed a calming hand on her shoulder. Haste is the enemy of magic, my child. The mountain cannot be rushed. It has its own time. We must respect it, or it will give us nothing. Their climb became steeper, more treacherous. They navigated narrow ledges and scaled sheer rock faces. The air became so thin that every breath was a conscious effort. They were now in the realm of the clouds, which drifted around them like silent, gray ghosts. One afternoon, they reached a high, flat plateau. In the center stood a single, ancient areco tree, its roots gripping the very stone of the mountain. This is a gateway, Ease said, his voice hushed with reverence. The stone heart is near, but its guardian will test us. As they approached the tree, the wind began to whisper, but this was not the familiar voice of the harmattan. It was a cold, sharp, and ancient voice that seemed to cut to the bone. You seek the heart of the mountain, the voice hissed around them. But you are creatures of the warm, soft earth. You do not belong here. The stone weeps only for the stone. It has no tears for you. We are children of the earth. It is true, great spirit of the mountain, Ease called out, his voice steady and respectful. But the earth is dying. We ask for a single tear from the stone heart to remind the sky of the life that still yearns to be. The wind howled, a sound of ancient, uncaring laughter. The sky's memory is long. It remembers being forgotten. Why should the stone help those who have turned their backs on the old ways? It was a question that pierced Zala's heart. The spirit was right. The people had forgotten. Their desperation was born of fear, not of true faith. Her own face wavered. How could they ask for a gift they had not earned? She looked at her grandfather, but he was silent. He was looking at her, his eyes asking a question of his own. It was then that Zala understood. This was her test. Her grandfather's wisdom could not answer the spirit. Only her own heart could. She stepped forward, her small frame braced against the wind. Great Spirit, she began, her voice clear and strong. It is true that many of us forgot. In our comfort, we grew deaf to the whispers of the earth and the sky. We looked only at the things our hands could build, and we forgot the magic that gave us the strength to build them. But a child who forgets their mother is still their child. Our hearts are dry with regret, just as our lands are dry with thirst. We do not come here as masters, demanding a right. We come as lost children, asking for the path home. The terror we seek is not for us, but for the memory of what we once were, and what we pray we can be again. Her words, spoken with pure, humble honesty, hung in the cold, thin air. The howling wind softened to a low hum. The ancient, hissing voice was gone. From a fissure in the great iroko tree, a single, clear drop of water emerged, glistening like a diamond. It fell onto a small, heart-shaped stone at the base of the tree, which seemed to absorb it instantly. The stone heart began to weep, clear, cold tears trickling down its surface. With reverence, Ease and Zala collected the weeping tears in the second clay pot. They had the second echo. Their descent from the mountain was filled with a new sense of quiet urgency. They had the tears and the heart. Only one echo remained. They journeyed to the deepest part of the Whispering Woods, a place few had ever dared to enter. There, hidden behind a curtain of ancient vines, was the entrance to the cave of the first river. The air that drifted out was cool and damp, smelling of deep earth and ancient stone. They lit a single torch and made their way into the darkness. The cave was a place of profound silence. After what felt like an eternity of descent, they heard it. A soft, melodic dripping sound. The sound of the first water, falling from the roof of the cave into a crystal-clear, subterranean pool. This was a whisper of the first river. For this last echo, Yi said softly, "We do not take. We only listen, and ask for a memory to be given." He taught Zala the last and most sacred chant, a simple, quiet prayer of gratitude. They sat by the pool, and for hours, they chanted, their voices echoing in the vast, dark space. As Zala chanted, she felt a profound peace settle over her. She was no longer just a girl, but a part of a chain of knowledge that stretched back to the beginning of time. As the first light of dawn pierced the darkness outside, a single, perfectly round drop of water detached from a stalactite and fell into the third clay pot, the sound echoing like a perfectly struck bell. They had the final echo. When they emerged from the cave, the world seemed different. The harmattan winds had died. The sky was still a pale, empty blue, but the oppressive, dusty haze was gone. It was as if the world was holding its breath, waiting. Their return to Ifeoma was a somber affair. The village was on the brink of collapse. Jide's great canal was a dusty, pathetic trench. The neighboring kingdom of humans, angered by the attempt to steal their water, had closed their borders to trade. The people had nothing left. Their new way had failed. Their old way seemed lost. When they saw Iz and Zala, carrying the 3 sealed pots, a flicker of something ancient and powerful returned to their eyes, hope. The great rain dance was held in the center of the village that evening. Every man, woman, and child was there. Jide stood at the back of the crowd, his face humbled and ashamed. Iz began the dance. His old body moved with a grace and power no one had ever seen. He was not just an old man. He was a force of nature. He unsealed the 3 pots. He mixed the salt tears with the stone hearts weeping, and finally added the whisper of the first river. He painted the sacred symbols on the ground, his voice a low, powerful chant that vibrated through the very soles of their feet. The villagers began to clap, a slow, rhythmic beat. They began to chant with him. Their voices, weak at first, grew stronger, a great chorus of prayer rising to the silent sky. The energy in the village square was immense, a palpable thing. Ease danced for what felt like hours, his body pouring with sweat. He was a conduit, the bridge between the earth and the sky. As the moon reached its highest point, he gave one final, great leap, and let out a mighty cry. Then, his strength utterly spent, he collapsed to the ground. A terrible, agonizing silence fell. The sky remained empty. A collective gasp of despair went through the crowd. Jai buried his face in his hands. It had failed. But Zala, who had been kneeling by her grandfather, looked up. She saw his faint, encouraging nod. She remembered his words. "We are the messengers." The message had been delivered, but the prayer needed a final voice. Zala stood up. She walked to the center of the circle, and in the profound silence, her voice, clear and pure, began the final chant her grandfather had taught her in the cave. A simple prayer of gratitude. As she sang, a single, dark cloud formed in the sky above her, and from it, a single, fat drop of rain fell, landing on her forehead. Then another, and another. A soft, gentle rain began to fall on the thirsty land of Ifeoma. The villagers lifted their faces to the sky, weeping with joy, letting the cool, life-giving water wash away the dust and the despair. The rain grew stronger, a steady, healing downpour. Ease, helped up by a humbled and grateful Jai, watched his granddaughter. The power had been passed. The face had been restored. The kingdom of Ifeoma had been saved, not just by the return of the rain, but by the return of its soul. They had learned, through the long, hard silence, that the sky never truly forgets. It only waits patiently to be remembered.